Alright, so let's get right into things. First thing we're going to want to do is download Ubuntu Server. We can do that by opening up any web browser and just searching for Ubuntu Server, and that should bring us directly to the Ubuntu website where we can download it from. I suggest getting the long-time support 18.04.1. If you're watching this video sometime in the future, just get the most recent version that's available at that time. Alright, and I'm kind of speeding and cutting and chopping so that we're not watching the downloads and like the installs. So you'll see, jumps pretty quickly, so just pause the video while you're watching. And the next thing we're doing is downloading VirtualBox. VirtualBox is essentially a virtual host that lets you run Ubuntu Server, whether you're on a Mac or a PC. I already downloaded it, so I'm not going to download it again. Whether you're on Windows, Mac, or any other operating system, you can download VirtualBox and run it from there. So once you've got all those downloaded, let's launch VirtualBox and create a Linux VM. Alright, I usually start off with 2048 by default. You really don't need that much for Nextcloud, but I do it by default just in case I might have multiple users on there watching video and that kind of thing. So maybe 2 gigs might be good. Alright, and we're going to go ahead and create the virtual disk. We're going to change the file location. We're also going to make it dynamically allocated and not fixed size. You can do fixed size, but if you create something like, let's say, 500 gigs, it'll take a real long time to create. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to go for 10 gig dynamically allocated. Alright, and I'm going to change it to an external drive, only because I have limited resources on my internal drive. Let's go ahead and create. And next thing we're going to do is set the network. Okay, so you want to make sure that you have a bridged adapter set up with your primary network card. So whether it's Wi-Fi or built-in Ethernet, select that and bridge it. Okay, this way you'll get an IP address from your router. Alright, and then we're going to pick storage and choose the ISO that we just downloaded for Ubuntu Server. Alright, we'll click OK, and let's go ahead and start it. Alright, so the start is pretty straightforward. It'll ask you for the language, keyboard setup, that kind of thing, username, so we'll run through that really quickly. You might get some auto capture keyboard notifications and things about the mouse and pointer integration with VirtualBox, which you can just close out. Alright, and in my case I'm going to be using English, and if you're watching this video you probably are too. Alright, so we'll let that configure and we'll hit install Ubuntu. Alright, and for these network connections we'll just hit done. Alright, we're not going to use any proxies. We're not going to use any mirrors, and then we'll use the entire disk and we'll format it, and done. Are you sure you want to erase? We'll hit continue. Now let's set up our username. So just for generic purposes, this one is going to be Nextcloud, and same thing goes for the server name and the username. So this is just a generic one. You can create whatever you want, but just for the sake of consistency, I'm going to go across the board with Nextcloud. Choose a password. Okay. And we're not going to import SSH. Now you'll see a bunch of options on this list. The only one we're going to go for is Nextcloud. So these are quote-unquote snaps. They're kind of like Docker containers, a little different, just kind of the Ubuntu version of this, I'm assuming, but they make the install of Nextcloud pretty straightforward. So you'll spacebar to select it and start the install. So the install just completed. Ubuntu Server is starting up for the first time. I'm just going to take the screen and kind of just stretch it out a little bit so you guys can see a little better the commands and that sort of thing. Otherwise, you might be looking at a pretty tiny screen. All right, let's let it start up. All right, so first boot is here. Let's go ahead and log in. All right, first thing we're going to do is just create a root user and enable the root password. And you can do that by typing sudo password. And we'll just re-enter it here. And now we have a sudo password. Excellent. All right, let's get our IP address by typing ifconfig. And you'll see your IP address on that second line down. All right. And let's see if this works. 192.168.175. There we go. OwnCloud immediately loads. So we know that the installation of Nextcloud was successful. It's currently not secure because SSL isn't enabled yet, but we'll get to that in a bit. In the meantime, let's set up an admin account for Nextcloud and finish the setup. Alright, you can choose to save the password if your browser prompts it. Here you just get a quick notification about the different types of devices that support Nextcloud, so it's pretty cross-platform. Alright, so we know that everything's loaded, we have our admin account created, and we'll kind of call it quits on that. So right now what we're going to do is create a subdomain, and I like to use freedns.afraid.org. You can go there, create an account. I'll walk you through the process here. Essentially, once you have an account, you'll log in and set up a subdomain with the available options. You can choose the starter pack. The starter pack is free. You can do up to 5 subdomains. They don't charge anything for it. It's a pretty great service. I think you do have to log in every, couple of months or so, just to make sure that they don't disable your account. But once you log in, you don't have to worry about paying or any kind of subscriptions or anything, unless you're kind of going big time where you need more than 5. I'm going through the setup here. You can do it while you watch as well. This part of the process is real time. Alright, and the purpose of the subdomain is to essentially port forward this domain when you get requests from the outside to your router. So your router knows if there are any requests coming in, let's say from port 443, which is SSL, or port 80, we know that it needs to be directed to our internal IP address. For, in my case, was 192.168.1.75. So that's the Ubuntu server. So essentially, it's just giving us a pathway to get to our Nextcloud server. You technically don't need this because you can just get there by IP address, but it's a lot easier to remember a name than it is to remember a string of numbers. At least for most people it is. So at this point, I verified the account, and I'm going to create an A-type subdomain. All right, and then you can. I usually choose like the .moo, which is I guess moo. You'll have others like Chicken Killer, and they have a bunch of other funny names for the subdomain, which is really irrelevant. It's just for the purposes of having a subdomain. So once you've got that subdomain created, you need to log into your router, and results may vary because right now I'm using like a really old DSL modem, and it has port forwarding set up in a really strange way. But essentially your ultimate goal is to port forward port 80 and 443 to your internal IP address, which in my case is 192.168.1.75. So that this way, when you're trying to access the OwnCloud server from the outside, your router will know how to get you there. So that's pretty much it. All right, so once that's set up, let's go back into the virtual machine. You'll notice that I'm using a virtual machine kind of emulator, or a terminal emulator. Just a little bit easier to read, but it's essentially the same thing in your virtual machine. Okay, so here I'm just enabling HTTPS, which is SSL, and it's a self-signed certificate. I'm not doing any Let's Encrypt service. It's just a self-signed certificate. So we will get errors when we're trying to log in, but it won't really matter because it's, you know, for personal use or, you know, small community use. So if you do get an error, just let people know that, hey, this is normal because the certificate is self-signed. All right, and the certificate looks like it's completed and Apache has restarted, so we are good on that front. All right, and once that's done, just for good measure, we're going to restart the server. Sudo reboot now. All right, and I skipped past the restart process, so you can pause the video and start it once your server gets back up. But at this point, we are going to have to make some changes to the accepted domains or known domains. Reason for this is, you know, if you're trying to access it from a domain that's not recognized, Nextcloud will give you an error. So we're going to add the subdomain that we created using FreeDNS, and we're going to add it so that it recognizes it whenever we make attempts to connect to the server. All right, and down this list, you'll see that the only known domain currently is going to be your internal IP address, which in my case is 192.168.1.75. Kind of sound like a broken record with that, but ultimately you want to add the subdomain, and you can also add your public IP address just in case you ever want to access your server using the IP address instead of the subdomain that we created. So I will be adding both. All right, so now that we've got those changes, let's give it a quick test drive using a cellular connection. This way you know that you're not connected to your Wi-Fi, and you can confirm that this works from an external network, and you'll be able to access this from anywhere. So as you can see, it says that this connection is not private because we're using a self-signed certificate. Totally normal. You could ignore it and hit visit this website. If you're in Chrome or Safari, you can always ignore that message and trust the certificate. Definitely don't do this if you don't know. All right, so as you can see, the Nextcloud login page shows up. At this point, you can log in with your account, you can create users, you can start uploading files and using your own personal cloud system. That's essentially the gist of the setup process. If you have any questions regarding creating users or anything like that, or if you'd like to see any other videos related to this topic, please let us know in the comments or on our website in our forum, and we'd be more than happy to create something along those lines. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you next time.